This hour of the Costa Report is brought to you by IBM. Big data at the speed of business.
Welcome to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and thank you for joining me for another 2 hours of straight talk radio. I want to take a moment to welcome U.S. military personnel who are tuning in over the internet today from remote outposts. Thank you for your service and for being with us again. In just a moment, former governor and senator of Florida, Bob Graham, will be joining us to talk about a topic that the mainstream media didn't see fit to give much coverage to, the importance of normalizing relations with Cuba in light of the environmental threat that Cuba's offshore oil drilling poses to the United States, not to mention the fact that Cuba is also retaining an American hostage. But before Mr. Graham joins us, as is my custom each week, let me take a moment to tell you a little about his background. Daniel Robert Graham was born in Coral Gables, Florida, the youngest of 4 children. His mother was a school teacher and his father a former Florida state senator. Graham is a graduate of the University of Florida and went on to receive his law degree from Harvard. In 1966, Graham was elected to the Florida House of Representatives and re-elected in 68. Then he sought a seat in the Florida State Senate and won election in 72 and 76. In 1978, Graham became the 38th governor of Florida and was re-elected again in 1982. As governor, he was known for his emphasis on education and the environment, and he was responsible for adding 1.2 million jobs. In fact, it was the first time in Florida's history that the per capita income in the state exceeded the U.S. average. So it comes as no surprise that Graham left office with an 83% approval rating. Graham joined the United States Senate in 1986 and served Congress for 18 years. He continued his work in environmental and financial issues and was also active in foreign policy. He was a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee for 10 years, which he chaired before and after the 9/11 attacks. After retiring from the Senate, Graham taught at Harvard for a period before founding the Bob Graham Center for Public Service at the University of Florida, an institution committed to training tomorrow's leaders. I'd also like to mention that Mr. Graham is a best-selling author. If you haven't read his thriller, Keys to the Kingdom, well, I want to recommend that you pick up a copy because it's a real page-turner and makes for a terrific summer read. It's my pleasure to welcome to the Costa Report former governor and senator of Florida, Bob Graham. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Graham.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
If it's all right with you, I'd like to jump right into your visit to Cuba. With so much focus on the Ukraine and the situation in the Middle East, we might be overlooking a danger that's far closer to home. Now, you've expressed concerns about Cuba's offshore drilling and the potential for another Deep Horizon disaster to occur if Cuba doesn't abide by the same safety standards that we do. Is that right?
That's correct, and we showed it in 2010 when a very sophisticated international oil company using world-class suppliers participated in one of the great environmental disasters in the history of the United States, the BP oil spill. Knowing how a company using all of the techniques of modern oil drilling, how they floundered, that raises the question of what's going to happen in waters that are only 50 miles from the coast of the United States by a country which has never successfully drilled in deep water and doesn't have access to many of the best-in-class safety technologies because of the U.S. embargo.
Now, explain to us how this works. I mean, even though Cuba is only 50 miles from our shores, we don't really have any say in whether another country chooses to drill safely, do we?
First, Cuba is about 90 miles from our shores, but the line of differentiation between U.S. waters and Cuban waters is in the middle. So they are roughly 45 to 50 miles south of the Florida Keys, where the beginning of Cuba's sovereign water commences,
yes.
And that is where the drilling is being proposed.
Now, what can we do about this? I mean, obviously, if there is a catastrophe, an oil leak, a failure on an offshore oil rig, that oil is going to come right up the coast of Florida, Louisiana, all of our coastal states. So what can we do? Is there anything we can do?
One thing we can't do is we cannot tell the Cubans that they cannot drill in their own sovereign waters. That is their prerogative under international law. What we can do is to encourage and facilitate that drilling being done in the safest manner possible, and that there is a response capability in the event of an accident. Both of those things will no doubt require a modification in the current embargo. As an example, while the great number of sophisticated technologies for deep water drilling, such as blowout preventers, are of U.S. origin, the embargo limits any sale to Cuba of an item that contains more than 10% U.S. content. That would effectively preclude Cuba or any third party drilling on its behalf from having access to the very equipment that we would consider necessary for a world-class safe operation.
So would you say that if for no other reason than avoiding a future environmental disaster, the United States should act to normalize relations with Cuba somewhat so we can solicit their cooperation as they begin to more aggressively drill for oil?
Well, the operative word in that sentence is somewhat. I'm not suggesting that we should totally lift the embargo, and we can talk about that at a point if you would like, but I am talking about a surgical change in the embargo which would allow Cuba or contractors working for Cuba to have access to the state-of-the-art technology for offshore oil and gas.
Right. What you're saying is a general embargo is likely to backfire because they can't get access to the safety equipment that might avoid an environmental disaster. So we have to be specific about what we're including in that embargo. Is that right?
Well, or we have a general embargo, but we already have several exceptions to the general embargo. For instance, U.S. agricultural products and pharmaceuticals and medical devices all today can have access to Cuba. The United States Coast Guard cooperates with the Cuban Coast Guard on search and rescue and other safety measures at sea. The U.S. Weather Service cooperates with the Cuban Weather Service in terms of tracking hurricanes and other climatic potential threats.
Yes.
So there have been surgical exceptions to the embargo, and I'm suggesting we need one now to assure that if there is going to be drilling, and it appears as if that is becoming more imminent, that it be done at world-class standards, and if it is done, there is also an accompanying capability to respond to an accident so that we don't have a repetition of what we had in 2010 after the BP oil spill, where it took about 2.5 months to shut down the flowing well. And it was in that 2.5 months that some $40 billion of damage was done to the environment and the economy of the United States.
Yes, well, what I appreciate about what you're doing, Senator, is you're preempting another disaster, and we should all be grateful in this country that you did make this historic visit to Cuba. We have to take a scheduled break. When we come back, we're going to talk about whether the time has come to start a meaningful dialogue with Cuba. You're listening to the Costa Report.
Did you know that every day we create 2.5 quintillion bytes of data, and that 90% of the data in the world today has been created in the last 2 years alone? This data comes from everywhere, and it affects everyone. This data is big data. Big data is all data, and it's more than simply a matter of size. Big data represents an opportunity to uncover new insights, make your business more agile, and answer questions that were previously beyond your reach. IBM's Big Data platform uses sophisticated technologies and patented advanced analytics designed to complement your existing information infrastructure. The IBM Big Data platform allows you to get started quickly today and expand to address more complex problems tomorrow. It doesn't matter where you start, it matters that you start. Find out how IBM can help you turn big data into a competitive advantage by visiting ibm.com/bigdata today.
Every day our world gets more complicated. Not only is new information coming at us faster than we can manage, new regulations, technology, and the effects of globalization have made it much more difficult to succeed. That's why I wrote The Watchman's Rattle, a book that, for the first time, explains how complexity makes it hard to separate facts from fiction, and eventually causes us to make important decisions based on unproven beliefs. And not just us, our leaders also fall prey to this phenomena. But here's the good news. Once you know the symptoms to watch for, you can safeguard against them. So please, go to RebeccaCosta.com, that's RebeccaCosta.com, and order your copy of The Watchman's Rattle. It only takes a few minutes and the shipping is free. That's RebeccaCosta.com. Do it now. You'll be glad you did.
My name is Debbie, and I'm from Aptos. About 4 years ago, I remodeled my house, and it was professionally decorated. I wanted it to look like a magazine inside, so of course, the end was beautiful plants. But how am I going to take care of them? So I called Jungle Plant, and Dale gave me a fabulous estimate. She comes in faithfully every week, waters, dusts, fertilizes, takes such great care of my indoor plants, and believe me, I have 15 of them, everything from large ficus to beautiful orchids. She's totally professional, trustworthy. She comes in when I'm not there. I really depend on her to keep things looking great, and she's become my really good friend. She's really knowledgeable about plants, knows where to put them so that they thrive, and if something goes wrong, she replaces the plants. My plants are a big part of my home decor, and I love looking at them and feeling something alive and green. So thanks to Jungle Plant, my home is complete.
So give Jungle Plant a call at 462-5806 or visit jungleplant.com.
Hey, buddy, it's me, your laptop. That's right, your little modern marvel of technology you've been abusing for months. Dude, we need to talk. Do you really think that those free PC Fix-It programs are any match for today's spyware and malware? Not to mention the NSA and some of those websites you've been visiting. Now, I'm not here to judge, I'm just saying. You need to take me to Peter and the friendly staff at User Friendly Computing to get me back into tip-top shape.
Tired of unfriendly computer support, slow computer, viruses, spyware? No problem. Call the friendly computer experts at User Friendly Computing. We take care of all your PC, Macintosh, and laptop needs. Mention KSCO and get a free $50 diagnostic. Visit us today at 505 River Street on the way to downtown Santa Cruz, across from Gateway Plaza. We give you a choice. Drop your computer by the shop, or we'll come to you. Call us today at 423-9653. User Friendly Computing.
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and our guest today is former Governor and Senator of Florida, Mr. Bob Graham. And before the break, we were discussing the exceptions which have been made in our embargo with Cuba, as well as our cooperation on rescue missions and meteorological threats and so on. So, Mr. Graham, is this a case where over time our relationship with Cuba has organically grown more cooperative as we find more and more reasons to work with our close neighbors?
It's still a very chilly relationship, and I think fundamentally because Cuba is very much like East Germany before the fall of the Soviet Union. It is a police state, and there's very little latitude for individuality. The principal private sector businesses are restaurants, which have to be located in private homes. Previously, they actually could only employ members of the family who lived in the private home. That's been somewhat relaxed. But the opportunities for individual freedom as we know it are very limited in Cuba. I think that what we ought to be focused on today is what will be the window of opportunity when the Castro brothers leave the scene, and they're both in their 80s. We need to be building relationships with institutions that will play a potentially influential role in what kind of Cuba there is after the departure of the Castro brothers. As an example, I met recently with the Archbishop of the Roman Catholic Church for South Florida, who's had an extensive series of contacts and relationships in Cuba. That's the Catholic Church will be a very important institution. The military is going to be an important institution. I've encouraged for a number of years that rather than our current policy, which is that U.S. military personnel, for instance, assigned to a U.S. embassy in a foreign country, cannot meet with their counterpart military personnel from Cuba. There may have been a rationale for that policy 60 years ago, but today it inhibits the development of relationships which at this period of opportunity when the Castro government is no longer in place could be of very significant value to the United States and other countries that share our democratic values.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, sharing our democratic values. Some say that we are at a hostage standoff like we used to see during the Cold War. Cuba wants the U.S. to release 5 Cuban agents who are presently serving jail time in the U.S., and the United States wants Alan Gross released, who was a U.S. aid worker convicted of hooking up to the Internet without permission from the Cuban government, and he's currently serving a 15-year prison term in Cuba. So is this a case where the better part of wisdom says we make a good old-fashioned Bergdahl type of trade and call it a day?
That may well be the ultimate outcome of this. Actually, I understand that at least one and maybe two of those 5 Cubans who have been in U.S. prisons have now served their time and have been released, and I assume returned to Cuba. So the numbers involved have gotten to be quite small. I think it would be certainly in the interest of the Cuban people if Mr. Gross were to be released from prison. He is a man who's in very poor health. Most of his time has actually been spent in a military hospital. To call connecting to the internet a crime is a violation of virtually all standards of international law and behavior. I think Cuba would remove a stain from its already sullied reputation by the release of Alan Gross.
But Cuba has already put a hostage exchange offer on the table. So when our leaders say we'll leave no American behind, what do we mean? I guess my question is, I'm going to phrase my question differently. How is Bergdahl? How did he get to the top of the list? Do you have any idea why he would get to the top of the list versus an Alan Gross who was a U.S. aid worker?
Generally, that concept of leave no one behind applies to persons who are in a combat or combat-like environment. Whether there has been a history of applying it to others, including persons who have some affiliation with the United States government, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you know if there's any discussion of doing a hostage trade? I would imagine they would involve you, since you know probably as much about U.S.-Cuban relations as any of our leaders.
I know that there have been discussions going on relative to that, and that the U.S. interest section in Havana stays, to the degree possible, in close contact with Mr. Gross. How far those discussions have gone, whether some release, whether it's based on humanitarian grounds or whether it's based on a trade, is near at hand, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. What interest does it serve Cuba to hold on to an Alan Gross, in your view?
It's hard for me to answer that question, because that gets to the peculiar psychology of this police state. But one would be just to demonstrate the fact that it has the power and the will to enforce some of the bizarre sanctions that it imposes on its own people and on non-Cuban citizens who are resident in Cuba.
I see. So that the government would be making the statement that when we say don't connect to the internet, we don't care if you're a U.S. citizen or a Cuban citizen.
And we're prepared to back up that statement by harsh treatment.
Mm-hmm. I see. And as far as you know, there is actually no movement currently with any attempts to get Alan Gross back in the United States, which, as you point out, he is in very, very poor health at this point. I think there's some recent pictures of him. Presents a bit of a challenge if they don't release him and he were to pass away in Cuba. I would imagine that would not do much for U.S.-Cuban relations. We have to take another break. But stay right where you are. We're going to be right back with more from Bob Graham. You're listening to the Costa Report.
The crisis in the Ukraine is the latest global conflict to pit the United States against Vladimir Putin's Russia. While the Cold War may have ended, U.S.-Russia diplomacy is here to stay. Understanding this volatile new era is not easy. For many years, experts have been trying to explain Russia's new leadership, but cracking the inner circle has remained elusive until now. The American Program Bureau represents some of the most knowledgeable and prominent Russian insiders who are available to speak to your organization. Experts such as Mikhail Gorbachev, former leader of the Soviet Union and master architect of modern-day Russia; Vladimir Posner, the dean of Russian journalism; Andrei Kozyrev, the first foreign minister under Boris Yeltsin; and Pavel Palashchenko, chief advisor for 25 years to Gorbachev, are available to speak at your next event. No Speakers Bureau offers greater insights into how Russia impacts our economy, our world, and our lives. To schedule these esteemed leaders for your next event, contact the American Program Bureau at 800-225-4575 or apbspeakers.com. Mark Saturday, June 21st on your calendars and come up to beautiful Bonnie Doon for the 12th Annual Bonnie Doon Art and Wine Festival. This 21 and over event features gourmet food, wine, and beer tastings, live music, artist vendors, and both live and silent auctions. 100% of the proceeds fund the art, music, and science programs at Bonnie Doon Elementary School. Enjoy a lovely afternoon under the redwoods in support of a great cause. For information and tickets, go to BonnieDoonArtAndWineFestival.com.
So we decided to upgrade the look of our home.
You know, improve the curb appeal.
We decided to add the look of stone to the exterior.
We really like the stacked stone look.
Yeah, but when I checked into the price, it was ridiculous. No way could we afford it.
Then a friend told me about Genstone. Genstone.
Genstone comes in lightweight panels. They've actually engineered the hassle out of installation. No mortar, no mesh. It was easy. Even I could do it.
We just screwed the panels to the wall and it looks like stone. I mean, it really looks like stone.
Yeah, from the box to the wall in minutes.
We love the look of our home now.
And Genstone is durable, comes with a 25-year warranty, and offers additional R-value for insulation.
If you want the look of stone at a price you can afford, call Genstone at 800-955-STONE.
Trust me, you'll save money.
And you'll love the look. 800-955-STONE. That's 800-955-7866.
Visit GenstoneProducts.com.
Oh my God. An associate recently came home. He found his big barn garage and all the cars, equipment, and personal effects in it burned to a crisp. Was the fire caused by a rodent chewing through old wires? Nobody knows what happened in his walls, but there is a way to know what's happening in your walls, and that's to call on my friend Chris Jensen at JM Electric.
Thanks, Charles. And yes, it's really important to know whether our electrical circuits can handle the load, because if the circuits fail, well, every year thousands are injured or killed by home electrical fires. Here are 2 really simple things folks can do to get some peace of mind. First, go to jmelectric.com and take the home electrical safety test. After they answer 12 simple yes or no questions, they will have a good idea about how safe they should feel. If they don't feel safe, they can call JM Electric at 422-7819 and ask for a free current safe home assessment. That's JM Electric at 422-7819.
Go to jmelectric.com and take the home electrical safety test. I did, and I'm living easy this summer.
Join me for It's a Question of Balance with Ruth Copland Saturday evening 8 till 10. My in-depth arts interview is with Jet Williams, daughter of country legend Hank Williams. Hear her amazing story of how she claimed her true heritage. Is there anything wrong with a world in which everything is for sale? Is our topic. Join me Saturday evening 8 to 10 on AM 1080 or KSCO.com live stream.
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and if you're just joining us, our guest is former governor and senator of Florida, Bob Graham. Mr. Graham, we had to go to a commercial break, but do you have some final thoughts on Alan Gross?
Yes, I wanted to clarify. There is active negotiation going on between the United States and Cuba for the release of Alan Gross. What I said is I don't know how close that negotiation may be to reaching some positive outcome.
But to your point earlier, there were, I believe, 5 Cuban prisoners in the United States that the Cubans were asking for release, and I believe that number is dwindled down to 1 or 2. Is that right?
I think it's more like 3 right now.
Yeah, so there's basically three prisoners that they would like to have traded for Alan Gross. Now, switching gears for just a moment, you played a very important role on the Senate Intelligence Committee following the attacks in 9/11 in assessing the threat of weapons of mass destruction, the reason that we cited for entering Iraq. And we primarily define those weapons as chemical, nuclear, radiological, and biological. But what about a threat to our nation's environment? Say, an attempt to set off a deliberate oil spill, which would deal a massive economic blow to the United States. Does that, in your opinion, does that threat rise to the level of a WMD?
Generally, a WMD is defined as being an event which kills large numbers, say over 10,000 people, in one event. For instance, you mentioned chemical. Chemical is generally not put on the list of a weapon of mass destruction because while it is lethal in a limited sense, it is not likely to kill up to 10,000 people. Biological and nuclear are the principal means by which a weapon of mass destruction would be constructed.
Mm-hmm. So what about some attempt to create a deliberate ecological disaster?
I think that is that's a possibility in today's strange world, but it probably would not come under the category of a weapon of mass destruction. The idea of a terrorist group, for instance, trying to attack a dam and therefore cause extensive flooding, those what would seem to be over-the-top speculations no longer can be ruled out of the range of tactics that our enemies might utilize.
That's correct. We had direct reports that when they raided Osama bin Laden's lair in Pakistan, they found any number of plans to have terrorists simply light national forests on fire, because one single match could deal such an economic blow to the United States, just fighting those kinds of fires. And that was fairly shocking. Because it doesn't require training a terrorist to do much other than hike into a national forest and set a fire. So I think increasingly we have to think about eco-terrorism, and I think that's also another reason to bring state-of-the-art safety equipment into Cuba and also other nearby neighbors. Now, in a somewhat related subject, you have repeatedly called on our government leaders to reopen the investigation into the involvement of Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Syria in the attacks of 9/11. Would you take a moment to talk about that?
This has been one of my frustrations of the last dozen or more years, is that there's a lot of information that I know is available, but which has not been released to the public, and there's other information that has not been surfaced because the investigations have not been as thorough as they should have been. I believe that it is highly unlikely, impossible that the events of 9/11 could have occurred without those 19 hijackers not having external support. Somebody was helping them maintain their anonymity. Somebody was assisting in providing financing for what was an expensive set of training and other activities while they were in the United States. Somebody probably helped them in figuring out how to carry out the hijackings of the four planes. I think it's of high national importance to determine if it is likely that there was a support network. Who was the network? What did it do? And where did it come from? And what were the motivations of someone making that kind of facilitating assistance to these 19 hijackers, without which 9/11 would not have occurred?
Yes. Now, you've pointed out that the U.S. assumes that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is a loyal ally, but you've also implied that there could be some duplicity at play here. I mean, we can't know unless we investigate more thoroughly. And either way, this would have an important impact on our foreign policy with these countries. Is that right?
You're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the reasons why this information has been so closely guarded, is that it would put in a new light who are allies and who are enemies, and who are the people who will be one or the other, depending on what's in their immediate self-interest. The fact that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudis, the fact that we know in several places where there has been a thorough investigation that there were Saudis closely involved in assisting the hijackers while they were in the United States, and suspect that that was true in the areas where the investigation was so superficial that we did not get at the question of who was the support network. But I think this is a very central issue. At some point in time, it's going to become public, and it will be a matter of extreme embarrassment to the United States that we have denied ourselves this information and therefore denied ourselves the ability to make rational decisions as to how we should conduct our foreign policy. And it would be particularly damaging to the reputation of those who are responsible for withholding this from the American people.
Well, as you have said, unless we know where the source of the support is, it's going to be difficult to protect ourselves from future harm. But we do have proof that the money which enabled these hijackers came out of Saudi Arabia, and that money that's supporting many terrorist camps is also traceable to Saudi banks and backers.
Yeah, the largest supporter of al-Qaeda financially from the very beginning has been Saudis. In fact, al-Qaeda started in Saudi Arabia and then was exported to Afghanistan and now almost throughout the Middle East. So their fingerprints are all over this, and I think the American people deserve to know the full facts.
Well, I thank you for continuing that crusade, and I agree with you. The American people do need to have access to the full facts, as do our other leaders, so that they can take prudent actions to protect our country. Now, we have to take our last scheduled break. We'll be back with more from Bob Graham. You're listening to the Costa Report.
I'm here today with Scott Caraccioli of Caraccioli Cellars, and I have a question for you, Scott. What goes into making Method Champenois bubble?
You know, it's a process that's really defined by the French government that we've taken and enacted into our wines, which really drive the quality of our sparkling project.
So this is a process that the French government defines pretty specifically, and you remain faithful to that?
Yeah, 100%. And in some places we push it a little bit.
Now, how do the bubbles translate on the palate?
You know, it really gives you that vehicle, that mousse for the character of the sparkling wine, carrying the fruit and the complexity. It's the expression of the wine. To find out more about Caraccioli wines, visit us at www.caracciolicellars.com or stop by our tasting room in downtown Carmel, California. That's Caraccioli Cellars, Caraccioli, Cellars. Come taste the difference.
Did you know that every day we create 2.5 quintillion bytes of data, and that 90% of the data in the world today has been created in the last 2 years alone? This data comes from everywhere, and it affects everyone. This data is big data. Big data is all data, and it's more than simply a matter of size. Big data represents an opportunity to uncover new insights, make your business more agile, and answer questions that were previously beyond your reach. IBM's Big Data platform uses sophisticated technologies and patented advanced analytics designed to complement your existing information infrastructure. The IBM Big Data platform allows you to get started quickly today and expand to address more complex problems tomorrow. It doesn't matter where you start, it matters that you start. Find out how IBM can help you turn big data into a competitive advantage by visiting ibm.com/bigdata today.
The second annual Pleasure Point Street Fair is here. There will be live bands, a skate contest, local vendors, and a beer garden. A portion of the revenue will be used to benefit the unique and vibrant community of Santa Cruz and local nonprofits. Last year's event was a huge success with over 3,000 attending. Come join in the fun on the 21st from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. located on Portola Drive between 38th and 41st Avenue.
Ted Anderson telling you about Jordan Rubin's Beyond Organic Green-Fed Raw Cheddar Artesian Cheese featuring whole milk created through ancient dairy breeding, unpasteurized, untreated whole milk on the same farm the cows graze, containing natural sources of omega-3s, CLA protein, calcium, probiotics, and enzymes. I have never tasted cheese this good, and you need to try it. Contact your longevity distributor or call 877-878-4203 or go to gcnteam.com.
Shirt Crafter, your one-stop print shop, has been locally owned and operated in Santa Cruz for a decade, providing custom design services to help you build your brand. Shirt Crafter provides top-of-the-line custom screen printing, digital printing, embroidery, stickers, banners, business cards, and so much more. They carry top-quality brands of gear from T-shirts and polos to sweatshirts and ball caps. Whether you're outfitting your softball team or team building for your business, Shirt Crafter has it all. So build your brand with Shirt Crafter, located at 111 Ingle Street in Santa Cruz, or go to www.shirtcrafter.com. Or you could give them a call at 831-423-0537. That's Shirt Crafter, 831-423-0537.
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and today our guest is Bob Graham. Moving on to the current upheaval in Iraq, the Iraqi government has asked for air support, but as you know, I think the latest poll says 56% of Americans do not want the U.S. to perform airstrikes. Given the American lives lost to stabilize Iraq, what's the right thing to do here?
Well, it is not to send in military troops, whether they're in the air, sea, or on the ground. The situation in Iraq has been, for at least a decade, a country ready to explode, and now it has exploded. It was an unnatural country from its beginning back in the 1920s. The Europeans who drew the map of the Middle East tried to set up national boundaries that would capture people who had traditionally hated and killed each other, such as the Sunnis, the Shiites, and the Kurds, and put them in the same country with a strong leader, first a king and then a series of dictators, to keep them under control. Once the last dictator, Saddam Hussein, was executed, the lid was off, and we're now seeing the probably the final stages of disintegration of Iraq as a sovereign country. And I don't think there's any U.S. military action, no number of troops or aircraft or ships that could be utilized to try to avoid that collapse.
So do we do nothing?
I think we try to make the collapse as stable as possible by working with the Iraqis and our allies to determine what the nature of either a dramatically different country with a weak central government and strong regional governments that represent the different groups, or it could be like Yugoslavia. Instead of one country, Yugoslavia is now 5 or 6, and Iraq could very well be 3 out of 1.
I see. So you see a situation where you may wind up having separate territories for separate faiths and beliefs.
I think that's inevitable.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, whenever you see a situation as the Europeans went in, and as you say, they believed that all of these religious groups could coexist. We always seem to go into these countries with this idea that, in the United States, Catholics and Lutherans and Buddhists and Islamists all seem to, drive on the same freeways, shop in the same grocery stores. Nobody seems to have any major problems. And we always go in with this optimism that, not to quote Rodney King, but, everyone will get along.
Yes, we tend to bring our own values and assume that that's what motivates everybody. But you don't have to go back into deep history. It's been within the last couple of decades that the relations between the Protestants in Northern Ireland and the Catholics in the Republic of Ireland led to year after year of bloodshed.
But they worked things out.
They finally did, and it is a relationship and a peace that has stabilized. I think our goal in Iraq would be to use our diplomatic and economic power and skill to try to create that same relationship in Iraq that has existed now for about 15 years in Ireland.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your view, is what we're seeing happening in Iraq similar to the chaos that we should expect to occur in Afghanistan as we pull out of that country and there's really no means for their economy to exist without U.S. dollars?
I think Afghanistan is a different situation than Iraq. Afghanistan is a country which has been a country for centuries.
Yes.
And it has a sense of real nationalism. I don't think it is going to disintegrate into regional or religious violence as Iraq has now done. I think it's got some different challenges. The Taliban, which had controlled Afghanistan from the time the Russians were kicked out until 9/11, is trying to stage a recovery in Afghanistan. That would be very adverse to our interest, which is that Afghanistan be a stable, democratic country. So we have interest there, but they're different in the threats that they've got to resist than is the case in Iraq.
Are we in any danger, Senator, of going into these countries, cleaning things up, pulling out, and then watching them disintegrate and fall into the very hands that we pulled the country out of? I mean, are we getting a reputation of short-timers?
Well, we've had a history of that. And again, Afghanistan, after the Russians left, we left, and we left behind a lot of military equipment, particularly Stingers, anti-aircraft missiles, which were then used against us by Al-Qaeda. We also left behind a society that had been ravaged by war and occupation, and expecting that the United States and other allies would stay in Afghanistan and help them build a stable country in the post-Soviet era.
Yes.
That didn't happen. It became the breeding grounds for Al-Qaeda and the launching pad for 9/11.
Well, believe it or not, Senator, we are out of time. I could have you on for hours because there are very few leaders, and I hope that all of our listeners are appreciating this. There are very few leaders that are going to spell it out the way it is, and I have always appreciated that about you. But before we do say goodbye, I'd like to take a moment to thank you for your service to our nation and to the young people of our country. Thank you, Mr. Graham.
Rebecca, thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I'm spending most of my time now trying to motivate young people to be active citizens, not just passively sitting in the grandstand, but down on the field playing the tough game of democracy. Every generation of Americans need to be involved in order to maintain the strength and vitality of our democracy and be able to pass it on to our children, grandchildren, and their grandchildren.
Well, we thank you for that work and for your policy center in the University of Florida. I've been down there, and the work you're doing is important and very successful. Thank you, Mr. Graham.
Good. Thank you very much, Rebecca.
If your station is leaving us after this hour and you have a question or a comment to make about today's program, you can email me at RebeccaCosta.com or drop me a note on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and let me know what you thought about our conversation today with Bob Graham. Has the time come to normalize relations with Cuba for the sake of preempting another deep horizon environmental catastrophe? What do you think? Seems to me this is an issue that both sides of the aisle might come to an agreement on. But then maybe we've become so reactive that we need a crisis in order to take action. I hope that's not the case. But let me know what you think. And if you missed the full interview with Graham or any of our other guests, you can download previous episodes of the Costa Report from our website at RebeccaCosta.com. And also from Apple iTunes, Podbean, and our YouTube channel. And while you're at our website, be sure to take a moment to order a copy of The Watchman's Rattle, the only book which spells out the earliest 3 signs to watch for prior to the collapse of an organization, a company, institution, even a civilization. The Watchman's Rattle traces these steps from the Mayans to present-day America and shows how gridlock, a confusion between facts and unproven beliefs, and finally, policy based on unproven beliefs, leads to sudden collapse. And speaking of controversial voices that may send your blood pressure soaring, my guest next week is constitutional lawyer and advocate for pro-family values for more than 5 decades, Miss Phyllis Schlafly. She'll be with us to talk about the dangers of laws which treat men and women the same and why she believes that women who make equal or more money than men will find it difficult to marry. Don't miss the always outspoken Phyllis Schlafly next week on the only news program which puts policy ahead of politics. Now stay tuned for a second hour of Straight Talk Radio. You're listening to the Costa Report.
Hi, I'm Amy Tobin, cookbook author and culinary expert. Strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, and raspberries. Dole has a bounty of berries ripe for the picking. Fresh berries are not only delicious, but some of the most powerful disease-fighting foods available. Researchers have found that berries have some of the highest antioxidant levels of any fresh fruits. So add a handful or 2 of your favorite berries to your next meal and enjoy their nutritional benefits and natural sweetness in all of your dishes, from salads to desserts and everything in between. For fresh tips and ideas from Dole's berry experts, visit berries.dole.com. And be sure to check out the pages of mouth-watering recipes. Whether it's a sweet and savory blueberry cranberry chicken salad or a simple strawberry sorbet, Dole has the perfect berry to inspire your next berrylicious dish.
Bring your family, friends, and well-behaved dogs to the Birch Bark 911 Pet Health Festival. There will be live music, food, 30 vendors to choose from, and first responder and agility training demos. It will be held Sunday the 22nd from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Seaside High School, off the Highway 1 Fremont Boulevard exit. All proceeds benefit the Birch Bark Foundation. See you there!
Have you ever watched a group of motorcycles roar on by and wondered, who are those guys? Where are they going? Well, now you can eavesdrop in on their biker world right here on KSCO 1080. A half hour of biker news, clues, and interviews with me, Biker Bob, and some of the motorcycling world's interesting celebrities. Biker Bob Radio on KSCO 1080.
Don't miss Biker Bob Radio every Sunday at 3:30 right here on AM 1080 KSCO. Remember, that's Sunday at 3:30 on KSCO.
From San Jose to Salinas, Red Hot News Talk, AM 1080 KSCO Santa Cruz.